Hi everybody, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and thanks for taking a moment to watch my video. So today I'm going to be talking to you about sequencing. I know if you're a yoga teacher, which is probably why you're watching this, you're probably oftentimes looking for different themes that you can use for your sequences. So I'm a huge proponent of using anatomy-based sequences because my specialty is anatomy and helping yoga teachers understand anatomy and understand ways to share it with their students so their students can understand it. No one wants to go into a class and kind of hear all this technical jargon because as a student it just goes all over, kind of way over your head, and you don't get it. And as a teacher, you don't really want to go in and start to share all this anatomy information and come across like you're a know-it-all. So one of the things that's really helpful is to come up with kind of nuggets of information that you can share with your students, kind of presented in an understandable and easy way for them to digest. And so that's my specialty, and doing that through the sequences that you provide, because let's face it, the sequence is really kind of the container through which your students will learn the anatomy. And the cues that you use are the vehicle, right? They're the how you're going to share that information with them. So let's take a look at a rationale for a particular sequence, because it's going to be really helpful if you have a reason behind the anatomy you're sharing in the cues in the container of the sequence. So let's look at external rotators of the shoulder. So these are muscles that live on the back of the body. And sometimes it's helpful if you're confused about muscles and what they do to just think about their placement in the body and how that relates to their function. So muscles on the back of the body act as external rotators and also muscles of extension. So if I look at shoulder extension, I'm looking at muscles like the latissimus dorsi and teres major, which are on the posterior side of the body. If I'm looking at actions like internal rotation of the shoulder joint, I'm looking at muscles like pectoralis minor, pectoralis major, and subscapularis. If I'm looking at muscles of hip extension, I'm looking at gluteus maximus and hamstrings. If I'm looking at muscles of internal rotation of the hip, I could look at muscles of the adductor group. I could also look at the anterior glute medius, which is on the lateral aspect of the hip. Now, if all of this is kind of gobbledygook to you, that's okay. It's just one of the things to just kind of keep in mind as you're kind of navigating your learning path as a teacher. Meaning, if a lot of what I just went over doesn't really make sense to you, it's a sign that you've got a learning gap around anatomy that it would behoove you to fill. Because any of what we're going to talk about here on my channel that has to do with anatomy and, again, cues and sequences, it has to come from an underlying fundamental knowledge of anatomy. You can try to fake it, right? You can try to just kind of absorb other people's cues and mimic their sequences. It never really works because you're going to feel like you don't really know it. You're going to feel the lack of confidence when you're using cues you don't really get. And if someone comes up to you and asks you a question, you're not going to be able to answer it. So wouldn't it be better to get that underlying training that you need, and then all these cues and sequence building that you do comes from that knowledge. And if you're a little confused about how to find trainings that specifically focus on anatomy, I can definitely help you there, and I'll include a link with this video to get on the wait list for my signature program, which is the Blueprint Learning Program. More on that later. So let's go back. We were looking at external rotators of the shoulder. So if we want to do some sequences to strengthen teres minor and infraspinatus, those are the two specific muscles I'm talking about. Guess what? One of the poses we do all the time, downward dog, uses some external rotation. So as you bring people into down dog, you can focus them on rolling the inner eyes of the elbows forward, and that'll bring a little more of that external rotation emphasis in, rather than having them turn in and begin to hunch and use those internal rotators. You can also have them do any number of back bends. So you could have them do camel. Certainly one we do a lot that uses external rotation is upward facing dog, of course. And then there are quite a few of the standing postures where external rotation, like your side angle and its variations, is at play. One of the interesting things about external rotations in postures where the arm is weight bearing is the tendency for students to turn in. So you'll see that here as they take the half bind, but you'll see the lower shoulder, which is weight bearing, is starting to turn in. You'll also potentially see that in something like side plank, where you want a little external rotation, but because the arm is weight bearing, you'll start to see that dumping in. The other place that you'll see it, which is really common, is when people move from high to low push-up. You want them to get a little bit of that external rotation because you don't want them to turn in and hunch and push the head of the humerus forward into the soft tissue of the joint. But to get that external rotation as they lower, they've got to do the same thing they did in down dog. They've got to kind of roll the inner rise of the elbows forward a little bit. And you can help them by not having them lower so far. So rather than doing this, have them just lower a little bit. And while they're lowering, they're getting a little bit of that external rotation as well. Now, that is a little bit trickier to cue seamlessly and in an understandable way. And it really, really does depend on your good understanding of infraspinatus and teres minor, their origin and insertion and action. So it wouldn't be the kind of thing that you want to just cue to the inner eye of the elbow and not know that stuff. And again, that's a lot of what I go over in my Blueprint Learning program. I help teachers learn the anatomy and then learn how to integrate it into the cues. We'll do one more. Let's say you wanted to focus some sequencing on posterior chain but the hip instead of the shoulder. So here we're looking at glute max and hamstrings, right? So your gluteus maximus is on the back, your hamstrings of course on the back of the thigh. And so anything, let's look at the concentric action of those muscles, anything that takes the leg back is going to be hip extension using those muscles. Anything that involves a back bend, even though the leg isn't moving back, I'm moving the hips forward. So, I guess you could say I'm taking the pelvis into that posterior tip. So that's going to be hip extension as well. So your up dog, your wheel, your camel, your bridge pose, any bridge variation you might do. So if you have people come into bridge and then you have them kind of hug the leg in and do some kind of, kick action, that's going to emphasize this posterior chain, power coming from glute max and hamstrings. So those are just a couple of themes. Posterior chain related, external rotation, and hip extension as the theme. And you could really go a lot of different directions with that. And it gives you, again, the container, which is the sequence. The anatomy is the rationale, the specific anatomy you're using. And then the cues that you share are the vehicle through which you communicate to your students and educate them about these muscles. So if you're theming your sequence around those external rotators of the shoulder, you're going to have plenty of opportunity to tell people through the cues about what is external rotation versus kind of that tired old open your shoulders, open your heart, which we hear over and over and over again. So you'll have chances to explain what external rotation is, what muscles of the body do it, what their function is in the shoulder, what's kind of the point of your theme. I want to help you strengthen these muscles because they tend to be weak because we hunch a lot. What are some ways that you can externally rotate your shoulders outside of yoga so you can kind of keep up with this good work even when you're off the mat. And that's a really good thing to do because that's how you expand your impact beyond just the class they're taking with you in the studio or online. So one more thing to wrap up. I promised I'd bring this up one more time. My Blueprint Learning Program is the vehicle through which I educate teachers specifically about anatomy and how to share it in the cues that they share it with their students. So if you want to get on the wait list for the next time I open enrollment, just go on my website, barebonesyoga.com, and the link to join is right there. And then the last thing I want to tell you is this whole idea of creating sequences and creating sequences that are based on different anatomy themes, I also share in my monthly membership called the Bare Bones Yoga Practice Portal. It's live classes and recorded classes, and you can bet many of the recorded classes include different anatomical themes. So if you're tired of kind of picking around YouTube looking for sequences to do, if you're looking to learn and link the anatomy to the sequences themselves, and let's face it, if you're looking for inspiration around practicing at home because your studios are closed due to COVID, or you just like to practice on your own, or you're a teacher that wants to invest in your learning by using the sequences as your guide, this monthly membership is for you. For the month of July, it's just $9.99, and I'll include the link to preview it and then to maybe sign up in this video as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear what you think, so leave a comment below. And don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss when I post the next video. See you in the next one. Namaste.